Welcome to episode 7 of the Manage to Win podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Russell, and my co-host, David Russell, is down in Orange County, remote right now. Today, we have two guests. We have Michael Stallard and Katie Stallard of Connection Culture Group and E Pluribus Partners. Michael is an author, speaker, and a consultant specializing in leadership, employee engagement, and a connection culture. And Katie Stallard is a partner at the group who works with clients and does a lot of editing. Katie, Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. And
happy to be here.
Great to be with you.
So what is a connection culture?
Well, a connection culture is, it's based on this bond that we feel with others that is based on shared identity, empathy, and understanding. And when this sense of connection or bond is in place, we focus less on ourselves and more on the needs of the group. And so it creates a connection among group members. In a nutshell, that's a connection culture.
And what is a good example of a company that practices a connection culture? So what does that look like in our daily life?
It's let me just mention this because I think there are cultures of disconnection too, and I think it helps people understand connection to hear more about the other cultures. And cultures of disconnection tend to come in two forms. One is a culture of control, where those who have power, control, influence, status in the organization, they rule over the rest, and not good for engagement, alignment, performance of the rest of the people. And then the second type of culture that brings about disconnection is a culture of indifference. And that's a culture where people are just so busy with tasks, they don't take the time to build relationships. They don't really value relationships, and they're just very task and results oriented. And that's not good either, just from a biology standpoint, from a performance. It may be successful for a while, but it's just not sustainable.
Okay. And what does a good connection culture look like?
Well, you mentioned, is there an example we have? And one that comes to mind that's based on the West Coast, out where you are, is Costco. And last year, Fortune had recognized Costco as the number one large company employer in America based on its research. And when you look at Costco, I've had a chance to spend time. I've spoken to Costco's warehouse managers worldwide and spend time getting to know Jim Sinegal, the co-founder and longtime CEO. And I really love their culture because we break connection culture down into 3 easy to remember pieces, which we call vision, value, and voice. Or in other words, when leaders communicate an inspiring vision, when they value people and they give them a voice, it creates connection. And so when you look at Costco, their vision it's different than a lot of organizations that are kind of mission driven. They're a little bit more values driven. So their mission, their vision is do the right thing, which they have a very specific definition for. It means we obey the law, we take care of our members, which are their customers, essentially. It's a membership warehouse, so they're members. We take care of our employees, we respect our suppliers, and when we do those things, it will result in profits, so we reward our shareholders. And it's been really a brilliant description of their culture that's made them extremely successful. And then in terms of just valuing people, you really see it in, number one, the way the leaders like Jim Sinegal. Jim just connects with people. It doesn't matter where they are, status or in the hierarchy of the organization. He loves people who work for Costco, and you just see it in the way he interacts with them. He's retired, but he's still coming in the office every day, as far as I can tell. And he just loves being around the people and so easily connects with them. And you see it, and Wall Street's always given Costco a hard time because they feel that they overpay their employees and they're too generous in terms of benefits. But Costco's view is we're not going to change that. because that's part of our culture, that we take care of our people. And it has helped them achieve a 95% employee retention ratio on a year-to-year basis, and 99% of their managers are retained. Now, when you compare that to the numbers in the industry, that's phenomenal financial benefit they have by just keeping their people. And plus the institutional knowledge that they keep, it really helps them grow. And just another thing that you see in their culture is they're big into training and mentoring and developing their employees, promoting internally. So they really provide a lot of career opportunities for the people who work at Costco. And then finally, they're great at the voice piece, which is they have the humility to know that nobody has a monopoly on good ideas. So they really do have this system in place where they encourage people from around the entire company, which is global, to think about ways to improve, and then they share those across the system. It really is a phenomenal culture, and I'm not surprised that they were recognized as the best large company employer in America.
And I think if I can chime in, I love Costco. I spend way too much money there, but
As
in
do
our
we.
local in our local Costco, I haven't seen him lately, but we had a guy whose name, interestingly enough, is Rob. Very big young man. Could have been a football tackle. Big guy, really nice guy. And I was talking with him one moment. Actually, I don't think I even was talking to him. I was near him, near the exit. And he went over, and there was a lady. It was pre-Halloween, and she was wearing a set of fairy wings, costume. And he said, "Excuse me, ma'am, did you purchase those?" And she goes, "Well, these I owned, and or I purchased before." And he goes, "Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. Would you come over here with me for a moment, please?" And did you purchase those at Costco? Oh, yes, I did. I purchased them before. Oh, okay. Well, then let me check on your account, because then that receipt will be on your account. And she said, "Well, actually, my husband purchased it." And he said, "Oh, well, that's okay. You're in the same account. We'll still see the receipt. Not a problem." And at that, I was with my kids. I said, "See how this works? See, you got to have boundaries, and you got to enforce things." And, we walked away, did our shopping. Later on, I caught up with Rob, and I said, "Hey, I saw the way you handled that. That was really good. I mean, you were totally polite. You were calm. Pulled her, you separated her out." I said, "How did that work out?" He said, "Well, let's just say it worked in Costco's favor." And the beautiful thing about that is when when I hear you talk about Costco and these things about their culture, we kind of we like it. We say, "Oh yeah, we want that. We want to do that," type of thing. The power, one piece of the power of it comes back to how people behave when you're not around. So Rob could have let her walk by. I mean, that's just a pair of fairy wings, right? Of course, he's so big, he's not scared of anybody. But he could have just let it happen. But instead, because he's so connected to their culture, to use your term, he steps up and does what's right for the company, what's right for the shareholders, what's right for the employees, and quite frankly, right for the other shoppers. Because if they let people steal stuff, they got to raise prices. So I think that's the cool thing when you have that connection culture, is it really inspires people to behave the right way when you're not around or you're not looking, type of thing.
And he did it in a really nice relational way.
Yeah.
He didn't call her out. He didn't shame her. He engaged her in conversation. He didn't let her off, but he kind of let's walk this through. So it's maybe they're given the permission to really
gave her
conversations with people.
And he gave her a lot of opportunities to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. David, I'm glad you brought that up, because there are 5 separate benefits of a connection culture. And one is that when people have connection in the culture, it gives them a cognitive advantage. They actually, when people are connected, their brain activity is in the prefrontal cortex, where we make the best decisions, rather than when we're stressed and disconnected. Brain activity shifts to the midbrain, where we're more likely to make a rash decision. And people who feel connected, they are more engaged, as you pointed out in this example. And they also align their behavior with the organization's goals, which, it lines up nicely with the example you just shared. They take the initiative to communicate information that decision makers need to hear, but at times may not want to hear, yet they need to hear it to make the best decision. And they also engage in conversations about how to improve the organization, and Costco gets a huge benefit from that. Because they care about the performance. We call them creative conversations that fuel innovation. So those are 5 distinct advantages, but it adds up to a pretty powerful performance advantage or competitive advantage if you're in a competitive marketplace.
Yeah. Michael, what were those 3 things that you mentioned that a connection, how to develop a connection culture or focus on for a connection culture?
Vision, value, and voice.
That's right. Yeah. I thought the voice was very interesting. Katie, it says in your bio that I have here that you have done spent a lot of time singing in a cappella groups.
I am. In fact, I was off.
Awesome.
That's awesome. It sounds like you have to be in connection with your fellow members, singers, a lot in that. Do you find that helps you relate to this connection culture idea?
I do. There's a real joy in singing as part of a group as we sync up together and bring our best, and the product is as excellent as we can make it. And this particular a cappella group is our mission is to go out into our local community and sing in nursing homes and retirement homes and for shut-ins, and bring the joy of music to people who may not be able to get out to it. And so not to go on about the grace notes too much, but it's really a neat thing to be in singing for maybe a group of people with Alzheimer's, and to see people's eyes open and become brighter, and they begin to sing along a little bit, and somehow we've reached in with the power of music. Doing it together as a connected group will bring it back to connection. So serving the community through music, that's this particular a cappella group's mission.
Yeah, and it ties into a really important part of connection, in that it's not just in our business lives. It has a big effect in our personal lives as well, right?
Yeah, it does, definitely. And, one of the things to understand about connection is that connection, it produces, there are a lot of benefits just from a biology standpoint. One is that it produces serotonin. That it's, when you think of positive emotions, there are primarily 2 paths of in our brain for positive emotions. One is the when we focus on tasks and rewards, then we get the benefit of dopamine. And when we focus on relationships, we get the benefit of serotonin. But they're very different neurotransmitters in the way they work. When with dopamine, if we're over-focused on dopamine and don't have enough connection in our lives, then what happens over time is this process called downregulation, which the more dopamine we produce from kind of chasing, it could be, chasing results in your business as it's growing, and then it's crowded out time for relationships in your life. You're producing a lot of dopamine. But what's happening is with dopamine, in the downregulation process, where the number of neurotransmitters are reduced in your brain, and it requires more dopamine to produce the same feeling. And so it becomes addictive. And I experienced that on Wall Street. We had a term for it. We called it deal heat. We were kind of locked in and focusing on a deal. And as you're getting deals done, there's a real rush from that. And as you do it over the time, though, you don't get the same feeling. You need something more. And oftentimes that drives people to addictive behaviors or substances that also produce dopamine. And so you get cultures that are really results driven without relationships are very unhealthy, because eventually the crash comes, because your body can't sustain that, and organizations can't sustain that type of culture. And when you have that balance where you need some dopamine to help us stretch and work hard and achieve, but you also need at the same time the serotonin and a second chemical that's in our blood called oxytocin. Those are we call them here and now neurotransmitters because they give us a sense of contentment. So they're another source of positive emotion that help balance out if the negative aspects, if we're totally focused on things that just produce dopamine. So it's really important not only in the culture of the workplace, but also the culture of the home. And you see a lot of people today are struggling with these issues. And I don't think they really understand what's going on. What they know is they're experiencing a lot of anxiety, depression, addiction problems. About half of Americans have one or more addictions, according to the research of Steve Sussman at USC. And they've squeezed out time in their lives for relationships. And so it's really having a toxic effect across America. And a lot of people are starting to question capitalism as a result. And I think capitalism is the best system personally, but it needs to be a culture where we have those relationships too, because it's just not healthy if we're just focused on our work all the time. We need those connections in the workplace and at home to really live a balanced life so that excellence and performing at a high level is sustainable. Otherwise, it's just not sustainable. The crash comes eventually.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. In my early 20s, I was caught up in a relationship, and I neglected my friendships, and it was sad to come out of that when the relationship dissolved, and I realized I had no friends. And I didn't have anybody to rely on. I had family. Of course, I've had a strong family group for a long time. But to go out into the world and not be able to immediately socialize and kind of something to fall back on and have those connections that today I find so valuable, it was really tough. And you've mentioned also that there's kind of an epidemic of loneliness in the world as well. And can you talk more about that?
Yeah, Jeff, and
before, hey, Michael, can I interrupt just to build on something you just said before we go on to the loneliness piece, which I think is important. Let me ask you a question before I forget, because I have a tiny brain and I'll forget. So, the connection the dopamine rush you're talking about, aren't we seeing an excessive amount of that thrown at us, whether it's our phone, vibrating or ringing, whether it's text, instant messaging that comes through on our computer, whether it's, hearing a ding when we get an email, all these little dopamine rushes can crowd out, if not managed well, can crowd out the connection time. And then all of a sudden you end up without that connection. It wasn't intentional, but you're just not managing your time and kind of managing how many of these things are like, oh, somebody emailed me and that validates who I am type of thing. Is that part of the issue also, that we're seeing more of this than possibly ever before because we have all these different devices, talking to us or dinging us?
Yeah, that's a really good point, David. It's surprising how widespread it is. You brought up technology, and that's one of the things that people have been critical about Facebook and Instagram and others is they are, and we know from what insiders have shared, they're intentionally designing our interactions with them so that they give us this dopamine rush. And the problem is, we also have a lot of sugar that's infused in our foods these days, processed foods, caffeine, all these things. They're excitatory stimulants that produce dopamine. And there's so many things that are triggering the production of dopamine in our society, whether it's technology or the workplace culture or the food we're eating, that it's burning out dopamine receptors, and it's leading to just widespread burnout in society because it's not sustainable. So that's why connection is so important. We really have to get back to that balance. Connection protects us because it's producing serotonin, so we get the positive emotions of that. But there's a second benefit too. Connection, when we're just focused on tasks and we crowd out time for relationships, that we think of connection as, or really loneliness, to get into the loneliness discussion, loneliness is a super stressor. It makes all the other stressors in our lives. When you look at stressors in the research, they tend to be stress from work, stress from financial or personal economic stress that we might experience, health. And in the last year or so, we've seen a rise in stress from just the incivility in Washington, which I think has spread to families, some just disagreements about the political environment. And that's been a cause of stress too. So there are a lot of stressors in our environment. I also think just we're deluged with information, and that's a source of stress. A lot of the information in the media is negative, so that becomes a stressor. And if we don't have those relationships in our lives, then the most protective thing we can do so that we don't go into a state of stress response is to have relationships. That protects us. But when we go into stress response, then our body overallocates blood, glucose, and oxygen to the fight or flight systems, the heart, the lungs, the big muscles. And it underallocates to parts of the brain, the hippocampus, the digestive system, the immune system, and the reproductive system are shortchanged in these resources. And so we don't feel well. And then we start looking for things that will make us feel better or numb the pain. And those tend to be addictive. So it's fascinating to see how all these bodily systems, when we don't have supportive relationships in our life, they really start to sabotage our life. They work against us. And you think of a whole organization where people don't have that connection in their lives. I would say a lot of Wall Street, sadly, is like that. That's why the burnout rate is so high on Wall Street. Yeah. Most people want to kind of hit what they call the FU number, a certain level of wealth, and then get out as fast as they can. That's the predominant mindset on Wall Street. And it's because it's a toxic culture that's disconnected.
Yeah, I imagine Wall Street's more about the money than the people.
Yeah, it is. When you see in the great leaders and organizations, they care about people, and they're motivated by their work that's helping people. We do a lot of work in healthcare with organizations like Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Hopefully we'll have a new article coming out on this topic too, that looks at loneliness as a systemic risk in healthcare organizations because it's affecting patients. It's contributing to physician and staff burnout. Even in the C-suite, half of the CEOs report that they struggle with loneliness. And so it's a big issue in our culture. And we've seen, as we've talked about, we've seen a lot of new research from Julian Holt-Lunstad, a professor at Brigham Young, who led 2 meta-analysis studies. And what she found was that people who have higher social connections have a 50% reduced risk of early death versus those who don't have those social connections. So it's pretty powerful research and it really makes sense when you consider some of the other things I've talked about, that parts of our body are being shortchanged blood, glucose, and oxygen. It would make sense that adds up over time, and it has effect on our lifespan.
It strikes me that it kind of in the background here of what I'm hearing you say is that as leaders, and I do view everyone in an organization as a leader, but in particular people towards the top of the organizational chart, we have to have an awareness. There has to be a strong awareness, a proactive awareness of when we are isolating people or allowing ourselves to be isolated, sometimes subconsciously, because in the media today and with certain politicians, the media and then certain politicians, I mean, that's their game. They want to isolate. So if I can isolate this group and have them against this group, then I can appeal to different voting blocks, political donors, whatever. And we see that to a certain extent in the media too, because it sells newspapers, sells advertising, whatever. So there's this divisiveness that is being we're being bombarded with each day, that if we're not careful with our awareness and being proactive and intentional to make these connections and make the time for these connections, they can get lost in the shuffle as we're busy firefighting. Am I correct in what I'm hearing you say, or how I'm kind of translating that out?
Yeah, that's, for me, when I worked on Wall Street, I wouldn't have said that I was lonely because I was around people all the time, but I didn't have that connection in my life. And so with my commute from Connecticut to New York City, with working longer hours, there was some time periods where I went through some pretty challenging acquisition or mergers to make the cultures work after the merger closed was impossible ultimately. And it was very stressful. And even when I was home on the weekends, my mind was on my work, trying to figure out how to crack the code and make these things work. And it had the effect of crowding out time for my friends and crowding out even though I was home, I wasn't present because my mind was thinking about my work. And so I was dysfunctioning. I started not feeling well. And then I started needing more coffee, more exercise to kind of rev up and get through the day at a high level, and then alcohol at night to slow down. And, the wheels were coming off the bus. I hit a point where I thought, I have no hope that this particular merger is going to work. And I ended up leaving the company I was with to take time off to heal. And that's when I decided to write a book on it and do research, and teamed up with a couple partners. And that led to our first book, Fired Up or Burned Out, that came out in 2007, where we introduced the idea of a connection culture. And the interesting thing was that wasn't on my mind when I went in, that connection was that important. I just knew that things were broken. You could see it in the research from Gallup when you have 70% of the people who are not engaged in their job, and you look at the assessment they use, the Q12, it's all about connection. And so where we ended up, though, was looking at all these areas of research really pointed to the importance of relationships to thrive in life. Now, we need tasks and to stretch ourselves and do work too, but if we don't have that base of relationships, we're setting ourselves up and our organizations for self-sabotage.
That's a great point. Are there people in organizations or just in general that have a better time developing connection culture or connections with others, and some people that struggle? Perhaps maybe introverts have a harder time developing connections than extroverts.
Well, Jeff, that's a great question. And it leads into just work we've been doing, interviews we've been doing in preparation for our next book. And we've really been getting into the backstories of people like Jim Sinegal, the CEO of Costco. I've spent time talking to Jim about this. Alan Mullally, who turned around Ford. We hope to interview Howard B. Howard, who really had a huge impact on the culture of Starbucks. And it's interesting that, a lot of them have gone through some difficult seasons in life, and that period of struggle and in some cases suffering, really it led to a humility and an ability to appreciate people and relationships. Often they had somebody reach out to them that helped them get through that period. And they really looked at relationships in a different way going forward. And David, you and I were talking about this before the podcast. And a really interesting example of that, who's presently in the news, is Pope Francis. And when you look at his background, I've been reading a book about the history of his becoming Pope, and when he was Archbishop in Buenos Aires and then Argentina. And he, as a younger leader, he was autocratic. During the period when Argentina went through what they called the dirty wars, and many people just disappeared off the streets. The military was in control. Just some really bad things were happening down there. And Jorge Bergoglio, who became the Pope Francis, during that period, he was more autocratic. He didn't really seek the opinions and ideas of others. And he made some rash decisions that contributed to, I don't think he did anything intentional that would have harmed others, but it put other people at risk who ended up being tortured. And I think the Vatican pulled him out of that position and moved him like 400 miles away from Buenos Aires. And during that period, as far as I can tell, he went through, there was definitely a metamorphosis in his character and his leadership. I think he went through a period of suffering, just realizing that some of the decisions he made were not wise decisions. And he led them, he relied on himself rather than staying connected to others and getting their opinions and thinking through some of these decisions more thoroughly. And it contributed to putting some other people at risk. And, who knows the whole backstory of what happened. But what definitely did happen, he came back from that experience a transformed leader. And today he is a humble, loving leader, very much like his namesake, St. Francis, who talks about preach the gospel often, if necessary, use words. And you just see him out there loving people. It's amazing. You see the picture of the Pope washing the feet of prisoners and kissing their feet. And, he just is he's a leader who really connects with people. You just see it in the way he interacts with them. He's a humbler leader, a much wiser leader. And I think you're going to see the Catholic Church is going through some difficult period right now, just cleaning up, some horrendous things that have happened. And he is cooperating with the authorities. He's being very open about fixing the problems and bad things that have happened in the Catholic Church. And I think you're going to see a transformation of the Catholic Church culture. It's happening already. There's still a battle. There's some people who don't, who are opposing him in the Catholic Church. But I'm optimistic that, some really great things are going to happen as the church becomes more connected within the church and reaches out and connects to other groups in society. And I say this, I'm not Catholic personally, but I have to say I really admire his leadership and his character.
Well, and also, look at it. It doesn't matter how many words he uses. He's demonstrating through his actions what his beliefs are, and that reinforces the importance of the connection. So I think it's a really good call out for our leaders here. It doesn't matter what you put up on the wall. It doesn't matter how great an orator you are. If you're not living it out, then something else is being communicated. So I think that's a lot where the power comes for him. Because I haven't read that much that he talks. When I'm seeing something in the news, but I don't look at the news that often, I'm seeing, oh, he did this, or oh, he did that, and should he have done that? It's always about his actions more than his words.
Right. Yeah. He really is. He's living the vision and communicating the vision just like St. Francis did. So he's really picked the right name for a pope to be the first, and he's the first pope to draw upon, to use, to be inspired by St. Francis' name. And he's a Franciscan, so no surprise that would happen. So it's just exciting to see what he's doing. David, something you said just triggered a thought. I really love what you just shared about you have to live it day to day. Because I do see some organizations, they'll have, say, a big annual retreat for all employees, and to them, that's like the big thing for the culture. But and that's nice. It's generous. It's a great thing that they're doing, and I think that is a very connecting event to pull everyone together. And in this case, the example, they're paying for their families to go on this great retreat, family members as well. But it's the day to day that matters the most.
That's right.
What you were saying, and I just want to underscore and highlight that. Because that's what really determines the culture, is how you treat people on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I was going to make that point too. And whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, it really matters how we treat one another. Do we appreciate each other's contributions wherever you are in the org chart? Do we give people a chance to offer their ideas and give their input and give feedback, and are we doing it in a way that the person feels heard and that what is being offered will be actually considered? It may not be the desired outcome of the contributor, but do they feel heard? Do they feel valued? Do they know that their colleagues are for them and that together they're doing something important? So often in these cultures of control or indifference, you, the person in the cubicle, might feel, you're a means to an end. People don't actually really care about you. They just care about what you're producing, or you might feel micromanaged or unsafe. Is my job on the line? Can I tell? Does anybody, do I matter to anyone? And all those things are very disconnecting, and you're going to begin to self-protect and pull yourself back and not give your best efforts if you're feeling controlled or that, people don't care. So our heart is really to be sure that leaders, wherever you are recognizing the true importance of the relational side of work and what people need in the workplace and how you go about delivering that in terms of vision, value, and voice.
We've kind of emphasized the benefit to the employees in a connection culture. But I also want to bring up, we have some great relationships with some of the leaders we work with, really, I think all the leaders we work with. And it's really important for them too, because if they isolate themselves and they're living on just the dopamine and the rush of, improving quarterly results and acquisitions, and people can get addicted to that. It's not good for them. It doesn't end well. If you think back to what I said about dopamine, how you need more of it over time to produce the same effect. And eventually you hit that period where your business is struggling. You're not getting those attaboys from people for all the earnings growth you're producing. And then, people start looking for, oftentimes you'll find CEOs will get involved in the extramarital affair, or, they'll take up extreme sports and do some illogical things. There's they'll maybe develop a drug addiction to cocaine or opioids or, some stimulant. So there are a whole host of things that are out there that will help people cope. But the tragic thing is they're addictive and they just lead to a crash eventually. And so I really have compassion for CEOs. They are under a lot of stress. Just about everybody is these days. And we just encourage them to build supportive relationships in the workplace with us. We want to be there to support them. I know you do that. And you also bring CEOs and leaders together to support one another. That's a great thing I really love about what you're doing. So it's loneliness and disconnection is bad for everybody in a culture from top to bottom.
Oh, and I wanted to make this point before when we were talking about just loneliness in society. If you're a leader in an organization, it would probably help you to recognize that probably many of your people are coming with a connection deficit to work. So they're already coming in depleted. So you should be really trying to be intentional about infusing connection into the workplace if you're hoping, if you're going to provide an environment where they can give their best.
It sounds like the leaders that are best suited to do that are the ones that have really developed a sort of empathy through their own experiences in their lives. So like you talked about Pope Francis serving in Buenos Aires, seeing some difficult things. Although I had to say, Pope Jorge has a great ring to it, don't you think?
Maybe down the road. So sometimes the leader may get to empathy and compassion from a personal, something hard they've had to go through. Or maybe it's because they grew up in a really loving family where it was modeled for them. We care about people and we're going to stop and help that person. And that's just who we are. So I don't want anyone to feel like, oh man, I've got to go out and find a struggle. I've got to, go through a crucible in order to be a good leader. No, we hope that won't happen to you. But if it does, we hope you'll come out the other side with some good things that you can carry with you. But it could be that you've come from a great, strong foundation and you want to make sure that other people have that opportunity also.
Well, it reminds me, Alan Mullally sent me something where he had shared in an interview with someone. And he said that I hadn't seen this before. He said that what he learned from his family was the most important thing in life was to love and be loved. And the great thing that just impresses me about Alan, but also about Jim Sinegal and Francis Hesselbein, Ann Mulcahy, who turned around Xerox, it's so, they just so clearly care for people and they love people. They're stimulated by being around them. They love Francis Hesselbein, who turned around the Girl Scouts, told me a story. She bought a new car, and she went to her local Ford dealer, and Alan Mullally, her friend, was there when it was delivered. And she shared with me, she said, Alan went around and he talked to every single employee at that dealership. And I thought, number one, Frances would notice that because that's an important value to her. And it doesn't surprise me about Alan Mullally because he really does love people. And, you look at the success he had leading Boeing and saving Ford, when it was forecasted to lose $17 billion 1 year or some a very large number like that. It really took a spectacular leader to pull that off. And he is indeed someone who cares about people, and he cares about results. Or, what we have a model we use, which is task excellence plus relationship excellence equals sustainable superior performance. And it's that relationship excellence and vision, value, voice that creates the connection that produces relationship excellence.
Well, I think you brought up the point that we see in a lot of leaders, and I would say most of people on this planet, that they've had difficult things in their life. And they have made bad decisions that have cost themselves and others. In the talk I heard about Churchill last night, I was not aware that, he was kind of instrumental in an attack in World War II, the strategy behind the attack on the Ottoman Empire, which the initial effort was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. It did not work, and the Allies lost 6 ships. They decided to double down and go back at it a second time. It cost 140,000 lives. And how you rebound from difficult situations, how you learn from bad decisions, and then apply those. I think that hopefully you reach a stage in life where you realize that these challenges are there for learning. They're there for growth, and they're there as an opportunity, once you're past it, to learn from them and apply them, behave differently, just like you brought up with the current Pope. Totally flip to a different style of leadership. And I think it's important to say that as an encouragement to individuals and leaders who are listening. You may be going through a tough time right now. It's okay. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and then you get an opportunity. It's not, oh, I got to live through this. You get an opportunity to apply what you've learned to then help others. As a matter of fact, when I had my .com go .bomb in 2002, and then in early 2003, I was on a sales trip. I got tired. I got depressed. I was face down on the carpet calling out to God. And the message I heard was, go teach people how to avoid your mistakes. It wasn't, go out there, Dave, because you're so brilliant, teach them all your stuff. It was, learn from what happened and go help other people learn from it also, so they don't have to go through the same pain. So can I also mention something else? Because you're talking about this connection, and I think Jeff brought it up, where, what about introverts versus extroverts? And then you also have behavioral styles, that type of thing. And there's a life coach I know who was talking to me, and she said that, some people are triangles, some people are circles. The triangle's kind of pointy and can kind of poke the circle, bother the circle, whereas the circle may roll past the other person. And one thing I would like to bring up a little bit more is that don't you find that a lot of leaders have to learn how to do the connection? They have to learn how to adapt to the other person's behavioral style. I think you mentioned it. Learn how to, I think, Katie, you were saying in particular, learn how to adapt to that other person's style, respect that style, so they can have those professional connections in the workplace.
Yeah, it does help to have an understanding of each other's wiring, so to speak, so that you don't misunderstand something or take something the wrong way that wasn't really meant that way. That to come to a place where you recognize we legitimately have different communication styles, or way. I'm going to think this thing through. I'm going to talk it out loud in circles for like half an hour. And, or maybe I'm just I got all the facts. I'm going to give my answer. And, if we have that understanding of each other, I think it makes it easier to not take offense. I don't know that I got to my answer in a straight line. Sorry. So, but it does very much help to recognize that we are all different, and there is such a richness in life if we can link arms and do it together to hear each other's perspectives, and that will come to a better outcome. And that relationships are really important. So you don't get a pass. Just, if you're an introvert, well, figure out what relationship excellence is going to look like for you, and how you're going to have your need for connection met, and how you can connect with your colleagues. And if you're a super extrovert, we have to make sure that all your extroversion is really authentic and it's really helpful, and it's anyway, help me through the end of that sentence.
It really does.
Where I was going with that.
I'm sure we use a tool called Core Motivation Inventory, where people write short stories about some experiences in their lives, and it then helps us see what their core motivations are. And then if you get the whole team doing that and sharing their stories and the core motivations that are identified in the assessment, it really helps them learn more about each other. And I know people use the Enneagram. Our friend Ian Cron wrote a great book about the Enneagram. And there's Myers-Briggs, of course, and DISC and others. But I think those tools are really helpful. They facilitate conversation so we get to know each other's stories and the way we're wired. And it just helps us understand, be more empathetic to people. And empathy, by the way, is a great producer of serotonin, just to kind of connect it back to the neuroscience part that I love so much.
We've kind of tiptoed around. I know you guys have a hard stop at some point here. Well, we've tiptoed around how difficulty in one's life often brings about that empathy. And I wanted to touch on that. The two of you have experienced your own struggles in life. I was wondering if you would speak to your own story about how you came upon a connection culture and how those struggles inspired your thinking related to a connection culture.
Okay, Katie's cancer story. Mike, why don't you start?
That's a setup. Yep.
Okay, I'll fill in the blanks.
So, Katie, do you want to tell the sequence of the different cancers?
Okay, sure. In December of 2002, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and had successful surgery, did my radiation, started my medicine, and a year later, like 12 months later, I was diagnosed with advanced ovarian cancer. Mike.
Yeah, and Katie's chances of survival at that time, that she would survive more than 5 years, were less than 10%. So it was, as you can imagine, we experienced some anxiety, and Katie didn't want to see all the research. She didn't want to see any of the research. I wanted to see all the research.
I was sure I was going to survive. Didn't need to have negative things in my head.
I was a little more anxious about it probably than Katie.
Right.
And so realizing that this was an uphill battle, we knew we had to be aggressive. Now, Katie's sister is a physician, and so she was very much in the picture, and she came out of Johns Hopkins Hospital and medical school, and so she talked to her contacts down there, and they recommended we go to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center after Katie had her initial surgery for ovarian cancer at our local hospital here in Greenwich, Connecticut. It's part of Yale New Haven. And so we went and explored around, it's called second look surgery and then intraperitoneal chemotherapy. And in our initial visits to Sloan Kettering, it just really caught us by surprise. I remember we walked down the street on our way to the entrance, and this doorman, who's become a good friend of ours, Nick Medley, who's now a concierge at Sloan Kettering. And Nick just locked his eyes on Katie, and as soon as she got in eyesight, he smiled, and he has this great personality. It's very unusual to see people making eye contact in New York City, but Nick's out there making eye contact with people, and he's probably the most beloved person in all of Sloan Kettering. It's a big organization. When we entered in the lobby, the receptionist was calling everyone honey. The security people, the administrative people were helpful and friendly. And Katie's oncologist, Dr. Marty Hensley, was upbeat and optimistic and educated us about the treatment options and answered our long list of questions. And just by the end of the day, we really felt connected to the people there. And it made me more optimistic. When we walked down the street toward the entrance, I was expecting a culture of death and dying. And we found that this was a culture of life and living and joy that I hadn't seen on Wall Street. And it just across the island of Manhattan. So this part of Sloan Kettering is on the east side of Manhattan. A lot of Wall Street is on the west side, at least the parts I was connected with around Times Square. And it was just a different culture. And as we got into the research, it helped me understand that the investment banking culture is more about dopamine. It's a dopamine-producing culture. And Sloan Kettering was a culture where certainly dopamine, but it's also serotonin. And, you just see a joy that people have in their work. They really support one another. They support the patients and their family members. And it's no wonder that they've been, named one of the top 2 cancer hospitals that are just focused on cancer for, almost 30 years now. So it was a great experience for us. We really felt optimistic. And Katie, this month,
January.
This last month, we celebrated her 15th year of being cancer-free from ovarian cancer. And now part of Sloan Kettering is our client. Katie and I do workshops to teach new supervisors how to create connection culture that protects their colleagues, them and their colleagues from stress and improves ultimately patient outcomes.
And I had a third cancer that came along maybe 10 years after the ovarian cancer. And I think part of what we learned through the experience was just how valuable, we already knew, but it reaffirmed how valuable being in community is. To have that connection with the medical team, with our family, with our friends, to get through this together. So don't do life alone. Open yourself up and do life with other people.
Yeah, we really had tremendous support from our family who came in and stayed for. We had a lot of family constantly.
Sometimes weeks on end.
We had neighbors. We had a woman in town who wanted to do all our laundry for us, and we just had incredible support. It just felt like Jimmy Stewart and what's the movie?
It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life. It was amazing the support we had, and it settled my nervous system. It just made me more calm and optimistic that Katie could get through this, that we could ultimately. And our daughters were just 12 and 10. So there's also that fear of Katie not seeing the girls grow up and the girls losing this really wonderful mom, in addition to losing my best friend and beloved Katie here. So it was a really powerful experience for us that, God allowed to happen. And it certainly was life-changing, I think, for our entire family.
That's really powerful. Well, I think we can end on that. Do you have any advice for people? I think the "Don't do life alone" was the great tagline here for this. Do you have any other advice for people that want to develop a connection culture in their lives and in their business?
Oh, he's pointing to me as if I have another gem up my sleeve, and I don't. Haven't worked out quite yet, but say the question again. Give me another run at it. Okay.
What would you say to people who want to develop more connection in their life, more serotonin, more positive oxytocin with their friends, family, and coworkers?
Well, I would say a couple things. There are many things you can do. Making sure you take a day off a week to really stay away from your cell phone as much as possible and your laptop. I know Katie has to hold me accountable here because I'm an achieveaholic.
Mr. Connection.
Yeah. Connector. I'm working on it as much as I know about it. So also developing friendships. I'm in a men's Bible study that meets on Saturday mornings from 9 a.m. till noon or later. And it's such a group, our youngest member's in his 20s, our oldest is in his 80s. It's about anywhere from 8 to a dozen guys show up on a given Saturday because people are traveling and such. But it's life-giving for me. Sometimes I go into that tired, and by the end of the time, I'm just energized being with these guys. And having something like that, being part of a faith community or developing some close friends that you can kind of process your week with on a day-to-day basis. And conversation is really great. Katie is, I know if I'm feeling stress or anxiety, just to be able to process things with Katie, sit down, talk about our priorities, talk through obstacles we have. It really calms my nervous system and helps me perform better. So those are some of the things I'd be thinking about. And a lot of people don't have that connection that they need in their lives today. So it's really important to take this seriously. And if you need help, find a mentor or a coach who can help you, someone who's good at connection, who can help you boost connection in your life. That person for me has been Katie. She's really strong in connection and has helped me a great deal. I've learned a lot from her.
What about serving other people?
Yeah, that's,
prod. Hey, Mike, how about that?
Yeah, no. And this is my hopeful lead in. Tell us about the Helper's High.
Oh, yes. When we serve others, scientists have identified that it produces what they have described as the Helper's High. And the amazing thing is, one of our daughters, Elizabeth, works for Building One Community. It's a group in Stamford, Connecticut, that helps immigrants get acclimated in the U.S. And there are a lot coming from Honduras and Guatemala these days because conditions down there are very difficult. And our church will send some people over there to help, just clean the facility and things like that. And so it's a group experience, but I never come away from something like that without just feeling this sense of joy and energy from being together and serving others. And that's the Helper's High. So if you're struggling with depression or just feeling down because you don't have you're relying on too much, not enough serotonin and connection in your life, get out and serve others. Find a way to serve in your community, and that will really help you get out of that funk. It's really important to do that.
Yeah, sometimes we just need to get our eyes off of ourselves and focus on someone else and doing some good in another person's life. And that will start to build some connection.
That's great advice. Dad, do you have anything closing remarks?
What I would build on what you're saying is don't do that alone when you do the helping thing. Be with a group, be at least with one other person. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I would encourage you to expect that you will not want to. Expect that you'll have I really should clean the kitchen, or I really should do my laundry, or I really am tired, I need to sleep in. Expect that you will have to battle with some negativity that's inside you to go do that thing, which then will make you feel better. And sometimes that's, quite frankly, sometimes it's going to the gym with a buddy.
That helps too. Yeah.
And that type of thing. So I think that's great. I really appreciate your time. I love the way you guys work together. Obviously, a lot of love between you that you then share with other people.
Thank you.
I think it's really wonderful. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I'm sure our audience will gain a lot from this episode.
No, thank you.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Jeff.
Let's chat again.
Yeah. Where can people go to connect with you guys and learn more about you?
You can go to our corporate website, which is connectionculture.com, or my personal blog is michaelleestallard.com.
Great. Thanks so much for being with us, guys.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.